What would you do if your faith was tested in the line of those who hated the Catholic faith? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Season 4 finale of March Martyrs. This video talks mostly about an individual from the Passion of Jesus Christ. If you want to know more on who I featured in the Good Friday special from the past 3 seasons, there will be a special playlist reserved for the Good Friday specials, and in fact, all martyrs in the series in order. With that out of the way, for this Good Friday special. This is the first time we are covering not only a person from the Passion of Jesus Christ, but also a bonus martyr. These 2 individuals we remember today. These 2 individuals are St. Joseph of Arimathea and Blessed Miguel Augustin Pro. This will be divided into 2 chapters. Part 1 will be St. Joseph of Arimathea, and Part 2 will be Blessed Miguel Pro. Matthew 27 describes St. Joseph of Arimathea simply as a rich man and a disciple of Jesus. But according to Mark chapter 15, Joseph of Arimathea was a respected member of the council who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God. Luke 23 adds that he had not consented to their decision in action. But according to John chapter 19, upon the hearing of Jesus' death, this secret disciple of Jesus asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. Joseph immediately purchased a linen shroud and proceeded to Golgotha to take the body of Jesus down from the cross. There, according to John chapter 19, verses 39 and 40, Joseph and Nicodemus took the body and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, myrrh, and aloes that Nicodemus had brought. Luke chapter 23, verses 55 and 56 state that the women who had come from Galilee prepared the spices and ointments. The disciples then conveyed and prepared the prepared corpse to a man-made cave hewn from a rock in a garden nearby. The Gospel of Matthew alone suggests that this was Joseph's own tomb. The burial was undertaken speedily, for the Sabbath was drawing on. Joseph of Arimathea is venerated as a saint by the Catholic Church and Eastern Orthodox Church, and in some Protestant traditions. The traditional Roman calendar marked his feast date on March 17th, but is now listed along with Saint Nicodemus on August 31st in the Martyrologium Romanum. Eastern Orthodox churches commemorate him on the 3rd Sunday of Pascha, the 2nd Sunday after Easter, and on July 31st, a date shared by the Lutheran churches. He is included in the myrrh bearers. Although a series of legends developed during the Middle Ages, perhaps elaborations on the early New Testament Apocrypha, tied this Joseph to Britain as well as the Holy Grail. He is not currently on the abbreviated liturgical calendar of the Church of England, although he is on the calendars of some churches of the Anglican Communion, such as the Episcopal Church, which commemorates him on August 1st. Many Christians interpret Joseph's role as fulfilling Isaiah's prediction that the grave of the suffering servant would be a rich man, quote from Isaiah 53:9, assuming that Isaiah was referring to the Messiah. The prophecy in Isaiah chapter 53 is known as the Man of Sorrows passage, quote, saying, "He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth." The Greek text said, quote, "And I will give the wicked for his burial, and the rich for his death, for he practiced no iniquity, nor craft with his mouth." Since the second century, a mass of legendary detail has accumulated around the figure of Joseph of Arimathea, in addition to the New Testament references. Joseph is referenced in apocryphal and non-canonical accounts, such as the Acts of Pilate and the medieval Gospel of Nicodemus. Joseph is mentioned in the works of early church historians such as Irenaeus, Hippolytus, Tertullian, and Eusebius, who had added details not found in the canonical accounts. Francis Giga, writing in the Catholic Encyclopedia, states, "The additional details which are found concerning him in apocryphal Acta Pilati, or Acts of Pilate, are unworthy of credence. The narrative of Joseph of Arimathea, a medieval work, is even purportedly written by him directly, although it adds more details on the robbers at Jesus' crucifixion than Joseph himself. He also appears in an ancient non-canonical text known as the Gospel of Peter. Hilary of Poitiers enriched the legend, and John Chrysostom, the Patriarch of Constantinople from 379 to 403, was the first to write that Joseph was one of the 70 apostles appointed in Luke chapter 10. During the late 12th century, Joseph became connected with the Arthurian legend, appearing them as the first keeper of the Holy Grail. This idea first appears in Robert de Boron's Joseph de Martyr, in which Joseph receives the Grail from an apparition of Jesus and sends it to his followers to Britain. This theme is elaborated upon in Boron's sequels and in subsequent Arthurian works penned by others. Later retellings of the story contend that Joseph of Arimathea traveled to Britain and became one of the first Christian bishop in the Isles, a claim Giga characterizes as a fable. The Gospel of Nicodemus, a text appended to the Acts of Pilate, proves additional details about Joseph. For instance, after Joseph asked Pilate for the body of the Christ and prepared the body with Nicodemus' help, Christ's body was delivered to a new tomb that Joseph had built for himself. In the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Jewish elders express anger at Joseph for burying the body of the Christ, saying, quote, "And likewise Joseph also stepped out and said to them, 'Why are you angry against me, because I begged the body of Jesus? Behold, I have put him in my new tomb, wrapping in clean linen, and I have rolled a stone to the door of the tomb, and you have acted not well against the just man, because you have not repented of crucifying him, but also have pierced him with a spear.'" The Jewish elders then captured Joseph, imprisoned him, and placed a seal on the door to his cell. After first posting a guard, Joseph warned the elders, "The Son of God, whom you hanged upon the cross, is able to deliver me out of your hands. All your wickedness will return upon you." Once the elders returned to the cell, the seal was still in place, but Joseph was gone. The elders later discovered that Joseph had returned to Arimathea. Having a change in heart, the elders desired to have a more civil conversation with Joseph about his actions and sent a letter of apology to him by means of seven of his friends. Joseph traveled back from Arimathea to Jerusalem to meet with the elders, where they questioned him about his escape, and he told them this story. "On the day of preparation, about the 10th hour, you shut me in, and I remained there in the whole Sabbath in full. And when midnight came, I was standing and praying in the house where you shut me in, and was hung up by the four corners. And there was a flashing of light in my eyes, and I fell to the ground trembling. Then someone lifted me up from the place where I had fallen, and poured over me an abundance of water, and from the head to my feet, and put round my nostrils the odor of a wonderful ointment, and rubbed my face with the water itself, as if washing me, and kissed me, and said to me, 'Joseph, fear not, but open thine eyes, and see who it is that speaks to thee.' And looking, I saw Jesus, and being terrified, I thought it was a phantom. And with prayer and the commandments I spoke to him, and he spoke with me. And I said to him, 'Art thou Rabbi Elias?' And he said to me, 'I am not Elias.' And I said, 'Who art thou, my Lord?' And he said to me, 'I am Jesus, whose body thou didst beg from Pilate, and wrap in clean linen. And thou didst lay a napkin on my face, and didst lay me in thy new tomb. And roll a stone to the door of the tomb. Then I said to him that was speaking to me, Show me, Lord, where I laid thee. And he led me, and showed me the place where I laid him, and the linen which I had put on him, and the napkin which I had wrapped upon his face, and I knew that it was Jesus. And he took hold of me with his hands, and put me in the midst of my house, though the gates were shut, and put me in my bed, and said to me, Peace to thee. And he kissed me, and said to me, For 40 days go not out of thy house, for lo, I go to my brethren in Galilee. According to the Gospel of Nicodemus, Joseph testified to the Jewish elders, and specifically to the chief priests Caiaphas and Annas, that Jesus had risen from the dead, ascended to heaven, and he indicated that the others were raised from the dead at the resurrection of Christ, repeating Matthew 27, verses 52 and 53. He specifically identified the two sons of the high priest Simeon, again in Luke chapter 2, verses 25 and 35. The elders Annas, Caiaphas, Nicodemus, and Joseph himself, along with Gamaliel, who under Paul of Tarsus studied, traveled to Arimathea to interview Simeon's sons, Charnas and Lenthius. Medieval interest in Joseph centered on two themes, that of Joseph as the founder of the British Christianity, even before it had taken hold of Rome, and that of Joseph as the original guardian of the Holy Grail. Many legends about the arrival of Christianity in Britain abounded during the Middle Ages. Early writers do not connect Joseph to this activity, however. Tertullian wrote in Adversus Judaeus that Britain had already received and accepted the gospel in his lifetime, writing, quote, all the limits of the Spains, and the diverse nation of the Gauls, and the haunts of the Britons, inaccessible to the Romans, subjugated to Christ. Tertullian does not say how the gospel came to Britain before the year 222. However, Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the earliest and most comprehensive of church historians, wrote of Christ's disciples in Demonstratio Evangelica, saying that some have crossed the ocean and reached the Isles of Britain. Hilary of Poitiers also wrote that the apostles had built churches and that the gospel had passed into Britain. The writings of Pseudo-Hippolytus include a list of the 70 disciples whom Jesus sent forth in Luke chapter 10, one of which was Aristobulus of Romans, chapter 16, verses 10, called the Bishop of Britain. In none of these earliest references to Christianity's arrival in Britain is Joseph of Arimathea mentioned. William of Malmesbury's De Antiquitate Glastonese Ecclesiae on the antiquity of the Church of Glastonbury has not survived in its original edition, and the stories involving Joseph of Arimathea are contained in subsequent editions that abound in interpolations placed on the Glastonbury monks in order to increase the abbey's prestige and thus its pilgrim trade to prosperity. In his Gesta Regum Anglorum, the history of the kings of England, finished in 1125, William of Malmesbury wrote that Glastonbury Abbey was built by preachers sent by Pope Illuridus to Britain. However, also adding, moreover, there are documents of no small credit which have been discovered in certain places to the following effect: no other hands than those of the disciples of Christ erected the church of Glastonbury. But here William did not explicitly link Glastonbury with Joseph of Arimathea, but instead emphasized the possible role Philip the Apostle said. If Philip the Apostle preached to the Gauls, as Frecklepus relates in the 4th chapter of his 2nd book, it may be believed that he also planted the word on the side of this channel also. In 1989, folklore scholar A.W. Smith critically examined the accretion of the legends around Joseph of Arimathea, often associated with William Blake's poem, and did those feet in ancient time, and its musical setting, widely known as the hymn Jerusalem. The legend is commonly held as an almost secret yet passionately held article of faith among certain otherwise quite orthodox Christians, and Smith concluded that there was little reason to believe that an oral tradition concerning a visit made by Jesus to Britain existed before the early part of the 20th century. Sabine Baring-Gould recounted a Cornish story of how Joseph of Arimathea came in a boat to Cornwall and brought the child Jesus with him, and the latter taught him how to extract the tin and purge it of its wolfram. This story is possibly grew out of the fact that the Jews, under the Angevin kings, farmed the tin of Cornwall. In its most developed version, Joseph, a tin merchant, visited Cornwall accompanied by his nephew, the boy Jesus. Reverend C.C. Dobson made a case for the authenticity of the Glastonbury legenda. The case was argued more recently by the Church of Scotland minister Gordon Strachan, and by the former archaeologist Dennis Price. The legend that Joseph was given the responsibility of keeping the Holy Grail was the product of Robert de Boron, who was essentially expanded upon the stories from the Acts of Pilate. In Boron's Joseph de Maurice, Joseph is imprisoned much as in the Acts of Pilate, but it is the Grail that sustains him during the captivity. Upon his release, he founds his company of followers who take the Grail to Britain, though Joseph does not go. The origin of this association between Joseph and Britain is not entirely clear, though in subsequent romances such as Purslava's composition that took much from Robert. It is not Joseph but his son Josephus who is considered the primary holy man of Britain. Later authors, sometimes mistakenly or deliberately, treated the Grail story as truth. Such stories were inspired by the account of John of Glastonbury, who assembled a chronicle of the history of Glastonbury Abbey around 1350, and who wrote that Joseph, when he came to Britain, brought with him vessels containing the blood and sweat of Christ without using the word Grail. This account inspired the future claims of the Grail, including the claim involving the Nantios cup on display in the Museum of Aberystwyth. There is no reference to this tradition in ancient or medieval text. John of Glastonbury further claims that King Arthur was descended from Joseph, listing the following imaginative pedigree through King Arthur's mother: Helias, Nepos Joseph, Genuit Joseph, Joseph Genuit Adamadab, Adamadab Genuit Philum, qui Genuit Jegernam, de qua Rex Pendragon, Genuit Nobilum et famosum regium Arthurum, pet per quod petet, quod Rex Arthurus stripe Joseph descendit. Elizabeth I cited Joseph's missionary work in England and was told that Roman Catholic bishops that the Church of England predated the Roman Church in England. When Joseph set his walking staff on the ground to sleep, it miraculously took root, leafed out, and blossomed as the Glastonbury thorn. The retelling of such miracles encouraged the pilgrim trade at Glastonbury until the abbey was dissolved in 1539 during the English Reformation. The mytheme of the staff that Joseph of Arimathea set in the ground at Glastonbury, which broke into leaf and flower as the thorn, is a common miracle in hagiography. Such a miracle is told in the Anglo-Saxon Saint Etheldra. Continuing her flight to Ely, Etheldra halted for some days at Alpham, near Witheringham, where she founded a church, and near this place occurred the miracle of her staff. Wearied with her journey, she one day slept by the wayside, having fixed her staff in the ground at her head. On walking, she found the dry staff and burst into leaf. It became an ash tree, the greatest tree in all that country, and the place of her rest, where a church was afterwards built, became known as Etheldrestow. Medieval interest in genealogy raised claims that Joseph was a relative of Jesus, specifically Mary's uncle, or according to some genealogies, Joseph's uncle. A genealogy for the family of Joseph of Arimathea and the history of his further adventures in the East provide material for the Histoire del Saint Graal and the Quest del Saint Graal of the Lancelot Grail cycle and Perlisvos. Another legend, as recorded by Florus Historium, is that Joseph is in fact the Wandering Jew, a man cursed by Jesus to walk until the second coming. Miguel Pro, whose full name was Jose Ramon Miguel Agustin, was born into a mining family on January 13, 1891 in Guadalupe, Zacatecas. He was the third of 11 children, 4 of whom had died as infants or young children. From a young age, he was called Coco as a nickname. 2 of his sisters joined a convent, and he entered the Jesuit novitiate at El Llano on August 15, 1911. One of his companions, Pulido, said that he, quote, had never seen such an exquisite wit, never coarse, always sparkling. He was noted for his charity and ability to speak about spiritual subjects without boring his audience. Pulido remarked that there were two pros, the playful pro and the prayerful pro. He was known for the long periods he spent in the chapel. The longtime president of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz, was ousted in 1911 after staging a rigged re-election and a struggle for power. When the Mexican Revolution began. Pro studied in Mexico until 1914, when a massive wave of governmental anti-Catholicism forced the novitiate to dissolve and the Jesuits to flee to Los Gatos, California, in the United States. He then went to study in Granada, Spain, from 1915 until 1919, and from 1919 until 1922, he taught in Nicaragua. Back in Mexico, a new constitution for the country had been signed in 1917. 5 articles of the 1917 Constitution of Mexico were particularly aimed at the suppression of the Catholic Church. Article 3 mandated secular education in schools, prohibiting the Church from participating in primary and secondary education. Article 5 outlawed monastic religious orders. Article 24 forbade public worship outside of church buildings, while Article 27 restricted religious organizations' rights to own property. Finally, Article 130 revoked basic civil rights of clergy members. Priests and religious workers were prevented from wearing their habits, were denied the right to vote, and were forbidden from commenting on public affairs to the press. Most of the anti-clerical provisions of the Constitution were removed in 1998. For his theological studies, Pro was sent to Arnhem, Belgium, where the French Jesuits, also in exile, had their faculty of theology. His health continued to deteriorate. There he was ordained a priest on August 31st, 1925. He wrote on that occasion, "How can I explain to you the sweet grace of the Holy Spirit, which invades my poor minor soul with such heavenly joys? I cannot hold back the tears of the day of my ordination. Above all, at the moment when I pronounced, together with the bishop, the words of the consecration. After the ceremony of the new priests gave the first blessings to their parents, I went to my room, laid out all my photographs of the family on the table, and then blessed them from the bottom of my heart." His first assignment as a priest was to work with the miners of Charleroi, Belgium. Despite the socialist, communist, and anarchist tendencies of the workers, he was able to win them over and preach the gospel to them. 3 months after his ordination, he was forced to undergo several operations for ulcers. He remained cheerful and courageous, and explained that the source of his strength was his prayer. In the summer of 1926, his studies in Europe completed, and Pro returned to Mexico. On the way, he visited Lourdes, France, where he celebrated Mass and visited the grotto of Our Lady of Lourdes. Pro arrived at Veracruz on July 8th, 1926. Plutarco Elías Calles was now president of Mexico. Unlike his predecessors, Calles vigorously enforced the anti-Catholic provisions of the 1917 Constitution, implementing the so-called Calles Law, which provided specific penalties for priests who criticized the government, 5 years of imprisonment, or who wore clerical garb in certain situations outside of their churches, which was 500 pesos. The law went into effect on July 31st, 1926. By this time, some states, such as Tabasco, under the notorious anti-Catholic Tomas Garrido Canabal, had closed all the churches and cleared the entire state of openly serving priests and killing many of them, forcing a few to marry, the remaining few serving covertly at risk of their lives. On his return, Pro served a church which was forced to go underground. He celebrated the Eucharist clandestinely and ministered the other sacraments to a small group of Catholics. Details of Pro's ministry in the underground church can come from his many letters signed with the nickname Coco. In October 1926, a warrant for his arrest was issued. He was arrested and released from prison the next day, but was kept under surveillance. A failed attempt to assassinate Alvaro Obregón, which only wounded him, in November 1927, provided the state with a pretext for arresting Pro again, this time with his brothers Humberto and Roberto. A young engineer who confessed his part in the attempted assassination testified that the Pro brothers were not involved. Miguel and his brothers were taken to the detective inspector's office in Mexico City. On November 23rd, 1927, Pro was executed without a trial. President Caius gave orders to have Pro executed for the assassination attempt. Caius had the execution meticulously photographed, and the newspapers throughout the country carried photos on the front page the following day. Presumably, Caius thought that the sight of the pictures would frighten the Cristero rebels who were fighting against his troops, particularly in the state of Jalisco. However, they had the opposite effect. Pro and his brothers were visited by the generals, Roberto Cruz and Palomero Lopez, at around 11 p.m. on November 22nd, 1927. The next day, Pro walked from his cell to the courtyard of the firing squad. He blessed the soldiers, knelt, and briefly prayed quietly. Declining a blindfold, he faced imitation of the crucified Christ and shouted, "May God have mercy on you. May God bless you. Lord, thou knowest that I am innocent. With all my heart I forgive my enemies." Before the firing squad was ordered to shoot, Pro raised his arms in imitation of Christ and shouted the defiant cry of the Cristeros, "Viva Cristo Rey! Long live Christ the King!" When the initial shots of the firing squad failed to kill him, a shoulder shot him at point-blank range. Caius is reported to have looked down upon a throng of 40,000 which lined Pro's funeral procession. Another 20,000 waited at the cemetery where he was buried without a priest present, his father saying the final words. The Cristeros, having became more animated and fought with renewed enthusiasm, many of them carrying the newspaper photo of Pro before the firing squad. Pro's spiritual writings were approved by theologians on June 1st, 1947, and his cause was formally opened on January 11th, 1952, granting him the title of Servant of God. At Pro's beatification in St. Peter's Square on September 25th, 1988, Pope John Paul II said, "Neither suffering nor serious illness, nor the exhausting ministerial activity frequently carried out in the difficult and dangerous circumstances could strife the radiating and contagious joy which he brought to his life for Christ, and which nothing could take away. Indeed, the deepest root of self-sacrificing surrender for the lowly was his passionate love for Jesus Christ, and his ardent desire to be conformed to him, even unto death."
Down the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem that day, the soldiers tried to clear the narrow street, but the crowd pressed in to see the man condemned to die on Calvary. He was bleeding from a beating, there were stripes upon his back, and he wore a crown of thorns upon his head, and he bore with every step the scorn of those who cried out for his death. Down the Via Dolorosa, called the way of suffering, like a lamb came the Messiah, Christ the King. But he chose to walk that road out of his love for you and me. Down the Via Dolorosa, all the way to Calvary. Por la Via Dolorosa, triste día en Jerusalén, los soldados le abrían paso a Jesús, mas la gente se acercaba para ver al que